So that's roughly what we're going to go through in about the next 90 minutes or so. We'll get into a second. I'll hand over to Daryl to do a project overview. We'll talk about the draft housing strategy and the structure plans and how those things interrelate. I'll talk a bit about consultation so far and where to from here. Then you get a chance to ask all of your burning questions as part of that Q&A, and then we'll get to next steps. Next slide, please. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Mr. Daryl Connolly, and Daryl will give some context as to the strategy itself and where we are right now. Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you, Mr. Nathan Williams, and thanks everybody for joining us tonight. It's really nice to have our Deputy Mayor, Councillor John Beswick, tuning in, as well as Latrobe's Deputy Mayor, Councillor Vonette Mead, and an extra warm welcome to Vicky Brereton, who we'll welcome as our new CEO here at Central Coast Council on the 7th of April. Councillors Beswick and Mead are both from the building industry, and Vicky's obviously soon to be my new boss, so the pressure is on me tonight, but thanks everyone. So, Our Homes, Our Future has really provided Council with a unique opportunity to think about what better housing looks like and to draft the planning scheme changes that are required to deliver that. We've been able to do it with a level of sophistication, community engagement and expertise that is generally well beyond the reach of Tasmanian councils, especially those in regional areas. So it's a super exciting project, and it's just been a pleasure to work with Ethos Urban on this one, actually. So ultimately, the work is about encouraging the diversity of housing that our community has told us that they need. The residential parts of our community, like much of Tasmania, is covered largely by the general residential zone. And at least here, that generally results in large houses on large blocks or some lacklustre unit developments. Of course, there are some exceptions, but on the whole, we feel that that's what the general residential zone has delivered for us. And the reality is, not everybody wants to live like that. And you'll hear in a minute how the changes that we're proposing will deliver greater variety, but whilst at the same time we protect the character of Central Coast. And I say proposing because Our Homes, Our Future, once completed, will be a plan, it will be a proposal, and any actual changes to the planning scheme, of course, will require the approval of the Tasmanian Planning Commission. It'll be subject to the usual statutory consultation process. That's a really important process that needs to be followed and not something we take for granted. If things do go our way, however, the changes to our town centres will provide more people with the opportunity to live close to shops and services in smaller, potentially more sustainable, more affordable homes. The changes in places like Forth, just out of town, surrounded by some of the most fertile soil in the country, will create new business opportunities and provide much needed accommodation for farm workers. Changes in places like Preservation Bay along the coast here will provide an opportunity for steep land that is currently underutilised to accommodate homes with superb coastal views. And, those are the types of homes that a lot of sea changes or tree changes are looking for in Central Coast, but they just can't find. So at the end of the day, I feel like this project is about variety. It's a lot about better housing, and a lot of it is about fairer housing too, especially for the young, the elderly, those living with disability, who currently don't have a lot of choice, who can't live close to the services they need. As a council, we have a really ambitious sustainable growth agenda when it comes to both population and economic growth, but we can't achieve that without getting housing right first. So you can probably tell I could talk about Our Homes, Our Future all day, but I'm not allowed to tonight. So I really appreciate your attention, and I'll hand over to Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Daryl, and thanks everyone for joining us again tonight. I'm just going to give a quick overview of the overall project. As Daryl said, there is a lot of work that's been done over a period of 9 months or so now. There is more to come, obviously, after the consultation period ends, but I just wanted to take you through a quick overview of all of the work that has fed into the Our Homes, Our Future project that is now out for community consultation. So we'll just jump to the next slide. Thanks, Kate. So the main components, I suppose, that are out on public consultation now for the next month or so are the draft housing strategy and structure plans for 4 places within the Central Coast. So Ulverstone, Penguin, Preservation Bay and Sulphur Creek is one structure plan, and then there is also a structure plan for 4. It's really important, I guess, to understand that the strategy and the structure plans take a roughly 20-year time horizon to planning for growth in the Central Coast. It's really important that we understand, what's happening now, but also what things might look like and what that demand for housing might be over a long-term period of time, because planning and development and delivery of housing takes time. The community has changed historically, will continue to change over that 20-year time horizon. So it's really critical that we plan for that long-term growth, but also, and Jack will get into this in a little bit more detail, make sure the plans and strategies are adaptable to things changing over that time horizon as well. Because if there's one thing that we know, it's, you can predict something, but none of us has a crystal ball, and things will change in ways that are different to how we think they're going to go now. We'll just jump to the next slide. So as I said, there's a process that we've been working through in partnership with council since about August last year. So we kicked the project off in August last year. We did some initial investigations, understood, opportunities and constraints, gathered data, went through a whole lot of analysis to inform the strategies and the structure plans. We were then down in the Central Coast in sort of October, November. We did a first round of engagement that was targeted with stakeholders, but there were also broader community surveys and activities like that have inputted to what you're seeing now in the draft strategies and structure plans. We then, at the end of last year and earlier this year, worked through all of that information and wrote the housing strategy and prepared the structure plans for those 4 locations. And yeah, obviously we're now at a point where we're out for public consultation on those draft plans and, as Daryl said, proposals. There's a few reports that sit behind the strategy and the structure plans, and they're listed on the screen there. So there's a background analysis report which really pulls together all that evidence base that we worked on in the early part of the project. There's a scenic landscape character study, which is really important in recognising that a lot of what attracts people to the Central Coast and keeps them there is the natural beauty of the place and the character of the towns and villages in the Central Coast. So that's been a really important study that has fed into the structure plans in particular. The other really critical piece of work is the retail and activity centre study. So obviously people moving to the area and a changing population creates different demands around, jobs, access to shops, things like that. So that retail and activity centre study really dovetails with the work that's been done in the housing strategy around what the community is going to need and what is sustainable from an economic and social point of view, in terms of the town centres and the retail activity across the Central Coast. There is also a consultation report which just summarises the outcomes of all of those consultation activities that I referred to earlier. All of these are available on the website, and I'm just going to hand over to Nathan now just to go through some of what we heard in the previous round of engagement and consultation. Thanks, Nathan.
Thanks, Paul. Just to build on what Paul was saying, our stage 1 consultation to help inform the drafts, kind of where we're at now, was completed in October and November of last year. I'm going to jump around this slide a little bit, but one of the key things to point out, if you move your eye over to where all the ticks are, this gives you an idea of the scope of activity, which was quite massive over a fairly short period of time. We received 473 online survey responses, which is magnificent. Had 3 community drop-ins, 3 stakeholder workshops, 4 community meetings, 1 focus group, and 44 youth participants. So it's huge. What I'd like to highlight is 2 really key aspects out of that. So over to the left of the screen, we had three really key findings thematically, and they were drawn out across quite a depth of information, but there's three themes that emerged. Won't surprise anyone. Central Coast residents love where they live. There's a particularly strong sense of community, embracing the coastal lifestyle and scenic landscapes. Residents are seeking a balanced approach to accommodating growth. So they want to make sure they keep all those things that they value, but also look for some of those opportunities. Third thing was residents want growth to improve and not compromise what they love about the Central Coast. So if you get a chance to read the full consultation report, it goes into these in a lot of detail. Two really quick things that I just want to draw your attention to in terms of snapshots. The information on the top right of your screen on that pie chart, that was about future housing needs and the types of housings that existing residents who participated in the survey may seek. And there was a lot of aspects that were really interesting. We saw a large portion of people who were seeking to downsize from their current home, and that was information from community drop-ins. One of the things that was really interesting about that was the lack of options for people to do so. The second thing I want to draw your attention to is what this question highlighted what types of housing people would want to see. This one's kind of interesting from us from a social research point of view, because red is good in this indication. It means that people agree with the question. What was interesting for us as well as a takeout for that particular question is people are looking for different types of housing than has been traditionally offered. So although things like high-rise apartments or things above 6 stories weren't particularly seen as broadly of interest to people, they were looking for different housing or housing typologies that were different from single dwellings or standalone homes. So something interesting from us in terms of that survey and research, and that's from people living within the Central Coast. Next slide, please, Kate. Another thing that we did was saw information from working age people who may move to the area. And what we tried to find out was what were their motivating factors to move to an area like the Central Coast. So what we wanted to find out from them is what would they consider to move to a new place? And then we gave them some information about the Central Coast. And then what we tried to find out was what were the factors that could draw them to the Central Coast. So three things that came out from motivating factors to attract people to the Central Coast. Those three things were more affordable homes, cheaper or better value homes, securing a suitable job, and access to shops and services. In terms of barriers, it was a cost of relocating, securing a suitable job, and a need to stay close to family. Two more things that were really interesting when you think about those people aged 18 to 49 who potentially may move to the Central Coast. And by the way, this was completed by 508 people, so quite an extensive piece of research. Almost 2/3 of respondents thought the Central Coast was the type of place they would consider moving to. So attracted by the natural environment, greenery and coastal lifestyle. The type of home most of them sought was a separate house with 3 bedrooms. So making sure that there was some availability of that type of housing stock was key to attracting those 2/3 of respondents. Next slide, please. Going to hand over to Jack to talk a little bit now. I've started to bedazzle you with statistics, and over to you, Jack, to talk a little bit about how we could consider responding to some of that input. Over to you, Jack.
Thanks, Nathan. Okay, so the housing strategy. It provides the strategic basis to coordinate the planning and delivery of housing. And what I mean by that is it's kind of like a compass, and it sort of sets the direction for change, specifically the amount, types, and locations for future housing. The housing strategy is informed by pretty comprehensive background analysis that provides an understanding of the community's housing needs and how we think these will evolve over the next 20 years in view of things like demographic change, population growth, transitions in the economy, that sort of stuff. It also identifies, importantly, where we need to intervene and make changes to planning policy to address those needs. What falls out of the housing strategy are the 4 structure plans, and they provide more detailed guidance around built form and the spatial arrangement of land uses, as well as some design guidelines, and these will inform updates to the local planning controls. Next slide. Okay, so the draft housing strategy, it has a vision statement and a range of key directions, and these collectively articulate the overarching aspirations for the development of housing in Central Coast over the next 20 years. Rather than giving a blow-by-blow account of both the vision and key directions, and listeners to the webinar can go to our draft strategy and read what we've said. I'd just like to touch on some of the important themes. So first, it's really important that we get housing right. Housing intersects with a range of social and economic factors. Get it right and it lays the foundations for a prosperous community. If we miss the mark or don't quite respond to the community needs, there can be all sorts of consequences: homelessness, sharp declines in affordability, etc. Second, and Paul touched on this before, it's important that we're able to respond to periods of low and high population growth. So Central Coast and indeed Tasmania observed really strong growth from 2016 onwards, but in the last couple of years that's sort of tapered off as the macro economies come off the boil. But we need to be ready for when strong growth does return, because it probably will. And that means that the planning framework that comes out of this and the strategies need to be flexible. It's also important to note here that Central Coast population is ageing, and the population is in structural decline, meaning deaths exceed births. So attracting new working age residents is really, really important from an economic development perspective. It's also important that we facilitate more diverse housing that meets the evolving needs of the community, particularly retirees seeking to downsize, and that goes to what Nathan said earlier. But also lower income households and people with other specific accommodation requirements, such as disabled people. Historically, housing provisions mainly been centred on conventional detached housing, but that is changing and will continue to change over time. We want to see infill development in and urban renewal in areas that are near essential services, so you get walkable neighbourhoods and more sustainable patterns of development. But we also acknowledge that greenfield development is the main game when it comes to housing delivery in Central Coast, and will continue to be so. It will continue to make a meaningful contribution to housing supply. And finally, the development of housing needs to sensibly respond to things like environmental risks, the built and natural heritage, and we need to make sure that it doesn't prejudice the character of the place, like what Daryl said at the start. On the flip side, Central Coast proximity to nature and opportunity for scenic views can be leveraged to attract residents, which is really important when you're trying to grow the population and grow the local economy. Next slide. A really important part of the foundational analysis that informed the housing strategy was understanding population growth and residential demand. As I noted previously, the population growth has significantly varied in the last 10 years, and you can see that prior to 2017, you had year-on-year declines over some years there over 100 people, and then from 2017 onwards, you had quite strong growth, and there's a number of years there where the growth is over 300 persons per year. So that's net growth. And then in recent years, in 22 and 23, there was a bit of a slowdown. All things considered, we think that a sensible line of sight to plan for is in the order of around 115 to 200, growth in the order of 115 to 230 residents per year. We're not saying that growth will fall in that band every year, but we think on average over the next 20 years, this is a sensible line of sight. If you translate that to houses, you get a theoretical demand for around 54 to 110 houses per year. So overall, what I'm saying here is the growth rate will vary, and we need to have the flexibility to respond to that. But we're not anticipating a radical shift in growth compared to what's occurred recently. We also need to remember that the amount of houses isn't everything, and we need to be thinking about what kinds of houses we're delivering to respond to the community's housing needs and where those houses are located. And that brings us to the next slide. Okay, so these are the housing opportunities and opportunity areas, and this is really where the rubber hits the road in the strategy. The housing opportunities areas outline the types of growth and where that growth is anticipated to occur. We've identified 4 types of opportunity areas in Central Coast. So first are the areas the first areas I'd like to touch on are those that are in orange. So they're the consolidation opportunity areas. These locations are identified to have the most diverse ranges of housing types. And that's because they have the best access to services and amenities, and will be incrementally redeveloped over time for denser housing, and that includes townhouses, terraces, and even some apartments in the longer term. The incremental housing opportunities areas are in light blue, and you can see they sort of surround those areas that are in orange. These locations allow for a mix of housing types and provide more homes in locations that have reasonable access to jobs, community services and amenities, but are not as well located for housing change compared to the consolidation opportunity areas. These areas still provide for gentle density, such as townhouses and terraces, as well as conventional detached houses, and similar housing types. The expansion opportunity areas are in dark blue. So these are areas that are existing non-residential land that are identified for future housing. So they need to be rezoned from a non-residential zone to a residential zone. There's not many expansion areas in Central Coast due to the municipality having a pretty generous greenfield supply. The dark blue areas at West Ulverston and Forth, we think are logical long-term inclusions, supply inclusions that will fill an existing gap in these settlements, while the expansion area at Preservation Bay has been specifically identified to bring housing online that caters for the higher end of the market, which we think is an existing gap. Finally, you have the minimal opportunity areas, and they're shown in yellow. And these are locations where the type of housing will generally remain the same as now, or should I say the delivery of the different types of the types of housing that is delivered. This doesn't mean there'll be no change in these areas, and there'll be still some new homes. We have an online engagement tool as part of the engagement phase for this project that will enable you to online and in an interactive map zoom into where you live, and you can check out what opportunity area relates to you and understand what that practically means in terms of the different types of housing that we propose. Next slide. I think I'm on to you now, Paul.
That is back to me. Thank you, Jack. As Jack said, those opportunity areas that he's just talked you through have informed more detail that I guess comes through in the structure plans for each of those 4 localities that we referred to earlier. So I'll just go through those at a high level. now, just to give you a bit of an overview of what is proposed under each of the structure plans for each of the towns. So we'll just jump to the next slide. Thank you. We'll start with Ulverstone, and this is obviously the Central Coast's largest town. It's the one that's got the most access to services and facilities and employment opportunities, recreational facilities. There are a whole range of things that make Ulverstone a great place to live. It's got really good access to beaches, bushland, obviously the River Leven running through the middle of town, and a really great town centre, shopping centre, which provides a lot of those local services just around, things like retail, but also access to, doctors, and a whole range of employment opportunities scattered around the town centre and other parts of town as well. There are also, there's quite good capacity of schools in Ulverstone as well. So there's sort of most of what people need in Ulverstone on a daily basis. And if we're looking at opportunities for, as Daryl mentioned earlier, the key findings out of the housing strategy were that we need to shift the dial a bit, I suppose, in terms of providing more variety of housing to meet the needs of a fairly diverse community and a changing community. And that housing choice really needs to be in locations where those residents will have good access to all of those things that a town like Ulverstone offers for them. So the concentration, I suppose, of the opportunity for more diverse and different housing and just increasing the supply of housing generally is greatest where residents can benefit from access to all of those things. So the orange areas and the brown areas on the structure plan map here are really where the greatest opportunity for that increased housing is. The structure plan, and we'll get to some examples of this in a second, but the structure plan really focuses in those consolidation areas still on providing more housing choice that is appropriate to the character and the context of Ulverstone. So as we said earlier, not losing those things that people love about this town, not sort of detracting from the reason why people might want to move here in the first place. So one of the key differences, I guess, and one of those areas where we're looking to turn the dial is around those better designed, more locally appropriate approaches to delivering more diverse housing in these areas. As Jack has pointed out, the incremental change areas that are the blue areas that sort of surround that, and they obviously expand over a larger area. We've just zoomed in here on the town centre and surrounds, but those incremental change areas largely, we're looking at the types of housing that are of a scale and a type that are generally consistent with what's there now, but also, as we said, just trying to lift the standard of design and make sure that new and maybe slightly different housing is not detracting from the character of the areas. So I've just seen a question pop up, and I will address it now because it's on the screen here. But the amenity-driven areas are those orange hatched areas. They're really the places that have that, best of both worlds, residential areas that have really good access to the town centre, either in Ulverstone itself or West Ulverstone, but also really benefit from proximity to the river and the beaches and the foreshore reserves, places like Bicentennial Park. Those are those areas where it's both a combination of capacity for additional housing and the sorts of places where we think people are likely to want to live because they benefit from all of those great things that Ulverstone has to offer. So the difference between the hatched areas and just the general orange areas, which are also the consolidation areas, is that there will be opportunity for perhaps more diversity of housing in those areas. And as Jack mentioned, there may be demand at some point over the 20-year horizon of this housing strategy for some low to mid-rise apartment type developments. You're unlikely to see those happening everywhere across that area, and there are only, you know, a limited number of sites that can actually accommodate that scale of development at the moment. But both in the town centre and in those orange hatched areas, you could see over time, as the market shifts and you know, acceptance of those kinds of housing might start to change a bit and demand for it might start to change a bit, you could see some more mid-rise, so, you know, 3 to 6 story development coming into those areas. Whereas in the orange consolidation areas, it's more sort of, you know, 1 to 3 story built form. And in the town centre, I should also just say quickly, in the town centre itself, we're still focused on maintaining that retail and commercial function of the town centre. So there may be opportunities for mixed use development within the town centre, but we really want to make sure we're retaining that commercial and retail focus at street level, then with potentially some residential above it or behind it or both. We'll just move on to the next one. So just moving on to Penguin, we're acutely aware, I guess, of the character and the, you know, a lot of the reasons, as we said earlier, that attract people to live in or visit somewhere like Penguin. It's a really picturesque, you know, coastal seaside town. It's got a real feel to it that is, you know, quite relaxed. A lot of people come to visit Penguin, then decide that they might want to live there. So it's a pretty hotspot, I guess, in terms of, you know, sea changes or retirees looking to move to the Central Coast. We really do not want to mess with that character and the things that attract people to Penguin. So the orange areas on the structure plan map here really wrap around the existing main street or main road, sorry, and town centre area, and are areas that sit within the landform, I suppose, below the higher land, which comes up more to the south and the west and a little bit to the east of town. So sitting some what we call gentle density within those lower areas that sit in between the town centre and the higher areas up on top of the hill that really enjoy those views out over the coast and things like that. So we also recognise that the town centre itself around Main Road has its own character and scale of development. We're not proposing any change to that character and scale of development in the town centre, but as Jack said, there may still be some you know, some development in the town centre itself, but still broadly consistent with the sort of outcomes that council and the community wants to see within the town centre area. So this Penguin is really more about housing types that are fitting in with the scale of existing housing in the area. So perhaps it's more like dual occupancies or low scale, you know, villa unit or townhouse type developments, possibly some, you know, 2-story apartment style development, but again, very low scale, very, very small footprint, fitting in with the existing, you know, structure of the town. And the other thing that's really important just to highlight here is the green arrows, which show the light green arrows, which show some of those key view corridors that we really want to work hard to maintain, so that, you know, people who currently enjoy those views out towards the coast and the north and Bass Strait continue to enjoy those views as a bit of development and change happens in Penguin in the future. So next slide. I'll just go through these really quickly, but just a couple of, so there is some medium density development that's happening in the Central Coast already. You can see some examples of that on the screen here. As I said before, what we're trying to do is really shift the dial in terms of design quality, and that medium density housing fitting into the character of these existing towns. So we can just jump to the next slide. These are some examples that we've gotten from elsewhere of the kinds of housing that might be appropriate either in Ulverston or Penguin or potentially both areas that do a better job of, you know, facing towards the street, fitting in with the character of buildings and the character of the town generally, you know, integrating with heritage values and things like that. You can see the one on the left there, which is actually a development that's tucked in behind a heritage house, and just maintaining that coastal style and character of these towns while still providing some of those housing choices and diversity of housing that there is clearly a demand for in the Central Coast. So it's really about trying to recognise that these kinds of slightly more dense and diverse housing were already happening, but we want to lift the quality of the design of those so that they make a positive contribution to rather than detracting from the character of these existing towns. We'll jump to the next one, thanks. So as we said earlier, there is the possibility in the future that there could be some mid-rise, low to mid-rise apartment type development, particularly in Ulverston, to a lesser extent in Penguin. We think the market and the character of Penguin is more about you know, lower scale, lower density, smaller forms of housing that are more suited to that area. So these examples are really things that you may see over the long term in somewhere like Ulverston. The one on the right is an example of what we call shop top housing. So there is retail, there are shops at the ground floor, and then there is residential above. But that residential is set back from the street so that if you're on the street looking at that building, largely what you see is the 1 or 2 stories that are at eye level and just above eye level, but the levels 3 to 6 are set back further from the street. So they're visually recessed from the street and less obvious, I suppose, have less of an impact on the character and the scale of development in the existing town. Next one, thank you. So just moving into Preservation Bay and Sulphur Creek, as we said earlier, not a lot of change in Sulphur Creek itself. The locality or the village is largely built out. There are some properties that are as yet undeveloped based on their current zoning. We expect that they will at some point develop over time with the types of housing that are very similar to what is in Sulphur Creek now. The more I suppose significant change is in Preservation Bay. So tucked in behind that single row of houses, which is the light blue area on the bottom map there, that existing row of houses that fronts Preservation Drive and looks out over the beach. The land slopes gently behind that to a point and then slopes very steeply up to the top of the ridgeline. So the dark blue area indicates that more gently sloping land where there is capacity to fit some additional housing, similar to the housing that's in Preservation Bay at the moment. So largely still single detached homes, but sitting on that gently sloping land, building in and some extensions to the street network so that those people can access those houses. Those properties will enjoy views out over the existing houses and out to the coast and the beach. But really importantly, the more steeper and elevated land to the rear of those, that dark blue area, is intended to be retained as green, rural, bushland character type housing. So we're proposing a scenic protection overlay in that area to protect the rural areas that sit to the south, but also the headlands at either end of Preservation Bay, retaining the existing character of those and the existing bushland and coastal setting that makes Preservation Bay a really nice place. Thank you. Next one. Again, just very quickly, a couple of examples that we've gotten from elsewhere of the kinds of housing that might work in with the slope of the land, but also really importantly have good space around them for landscaping and yards and things like that, so that we're trying to maintain that visual character that makes Preservation Bay, what it is. Just moving on to Forth. So the key change in Forth, we've had a lot of consultation with TasWater around Forth, and one of the key constraints at the moment in Forth is capacity of the sewer network. So from the discussions that we've had with TasWater, they've indicated that there is some scope for additional development in Forth, but again, really importantly, we don't want development to impact on the character of Forth and its attraction as a really quaint, rural village on the river. So what we're proposing in Forth is some relaxation of those minimum lot size controls for subdivision. So looking to reduce those permissible minimum lot sizes, but still predominantly wanting to just allow for single dwellings on those blocks of land that are consistent with predominantly what there is in Forth at the moment, just on slightly smaller blocks of land. This is really, about making sure Forth is sustainable in the long term. We want it to have a sustainable population. That means that the little local shops and the pub and things like that continue to trade and thrive. A little bit of just improvements to the street network and things like that, so people can get around the village a bit easier. And take advantage of the riverfront and the recreation ground and things like that, and also good access to the Forth primary school, which is a really important community asset for the area. So next slide. And then I think I'm nearly done. We've just got some examples of some of the existing housing, old and new, in Forth. So there is some new housing in Forth, and as we said, it's really important that the scale and the character of any new housing that happens in Forth respects the historical and rural village character of Forth, while we still add some additional capacity. And as Daryl said earlier, opportunities to provide a bit more housing for workers in Forth, particularly with Harvest Moon next door, but also people who might, live in Forth and commute into Devonport or to Ulverston or places like that for work. It's a really great location for people to live. I think that is me now handing back to Nathan.
It's to me, Paul. It gives you a
Thank
chance
you.
to pause, take a drink of water, and get ready for some Q&As to come.
Yep.
Just one thing I wanted to finish off, because there's a lot of content that you've gone through, and just to set the scene from all this, the consultation period is just beginning. There are multiple tools to use for you to get more information. One that is really important, and I'll just ask Kate if she can pop the URL in the chat while we're talking. Rather than me say it, I'll say it as well, but it'll be easier once you see it in the chat. There's an engagement hub website where you can find out all the project information. You can search your address. The tool's called Policyscape, but that's not what the website is called. That's just the tool that sits behind it. But in that tool, you can see how any proposed changes will affect you. So you can search your own address on that site and have a little look and see what is potentially proposed for your site. There are also all the information that we've shown you today in quite a lot more detail as well. We'll put this presentation on there as well. So that is a great resource to look at, and not only check the information, but also provide feedback in your own time as well. So there's opportunity to complete a survey, provide feedback on proposed plans as well. And that will run for the next month or so. So the URL, I'll say it as well, but it is in the chat if you just want to cut and paste. It is ourhomesourfuture.centralcoast.tas.gov.au. If you've got a phone handy, you can scan the QR code, have a name out, come back on the screen that you can see in front of you, but also feel free to cut and paste the website itself. Excellent. If we can move on to the next site, please. Oh, one other important thing to note, there's a really important word in that slide as well, and that is draft. To note that all of these plans, all of this information